Now in this video I wanted to give you a brief overview of another one of my most favorite features inside Photoshop, and that is the world of filters. And filters are basically effects that you can apply to your images. Now, some of the most common filters that are used by Photoshop users are the blur and sharpen filters for obvious reasons. But there's a whole host of filters that do all kinds of interesting effects if you just simply go in there and experiment with them. A lot of people tend to dismiss filters because they see the name and it, perhaps it doesn't do something that they expect, so they don't even bother with it. But let me just show you where they are. If you go up into the menu bar up here, and you can see the word filter. We click on that and you notice you've got a number of different categories of filters you can choose from. Here are of course, the numerous blur filters and the sharpen filters that you can choose from that I mentioned a moment ago. But you've got a number of different ones like textures and stylize, artistic and brushstroke filters. All of these can be accessed right by going into any of these menus, and you see the flyout and you choose from it. Now, you'll notice that some of these have an ellipsis by them right here, and some of them do not. Well, an ellipsis simply indicates that you're going to have a dialog box that allows you to modify the settings of this particular filter. If you see a setting that doesn't have an ellipsis on it, like this one right here, that means it has a very definite setting, and when you apply it, it's going to apply it to your image, and that is that. However, if you have an ellipsis, you'd simply go in here and you would choose, let's say we go in here and do a blur. So I'm going to go over here and go to the blur and do a Gaussian blur. And it will open up the dialog, and you'll get a small preview window which you can click inside and move around so you can see a specific area of your image that you want to see how it is affected. But also by checking on the preview button here, you can see that it is taking effect in my full image. And you just simply grab the slider and move the slider to increase or decrease the amount of the effect you want to apply. And then you simply click OK. Now, as I mentioned, all these other filters are going to have very different settings, so you'll want to go in here and perhaps try something new and just see what kind of different settings you get. You'll get a number of different sliders and all various settings like that. Now, another way of accessing these is through the filter gallery. You kind of got a brief peek of it just then, but if you go into the filter menu and go right here to filter gallery, it's going to open up that same window. And what this is going to allow you to do is basically preview the filters before you go ahead and apply them. Now notice over here in my preview window that we've got a couple of filters already applied here. Let's actually go ahead and throw this one away. So what we have here is our preview window, and in this column right here you've got a number of different categories similar to the categories you saw in the menu here. By twirling these down, you actually get small preview icons that show you the result of each one of these filters. And by simply clicking on one, it will apply it to your image, as you can see right over here. And it will reveal over here the various settings for that particular filter. So you can modify these and adjust them any way you like. And then if you like what you see in the filter, you simply click OK and it's done. Now, but the cool thing about using the filter gallery here is that you can stack filters on top of each other, as I mentioned earlier. Notice we've got this window over here, and we've got the poster edges, and we can turn the visibility on and off. But we can also go down here to the new icon and click it and add more filters to this. So let's say I go in here. So right now it's actually doubled up the poster edges, but if I got that one highlighted and I go in and choose, let's say I do a dry brush or even cut out, and let's increase or decrease the levels of that. And you can see it's having an effect on my image altogether. If I turn any of these off, you'll see it modifies that. You can actually change the order. If I can take that cut out and put it beneath the poster edges, it'll give me a very different effect altogether. So it allows me to not only apply the filters, but to stack them on top of each other and then rearrange that stacking order. And once I like what I've got, I can simply click OK, and there my effect is already applied. Now, if you have applied an effect, if you go into the filter menu, you'll notice the very first item right here. This is the very last thing you applied. So let's say I went in here and I went and did a let's do something crazy. Let's do the chrome. So I went in there and I did my chrome effect, and I wanted to apply that again perhaps. That's really ugly. Let's do something more, a little bit more appealing. We'll go to the artistic and we'll do, maybe apply a grain to this. There we go. And we'll just increase that highlight area. And I'll click OK. Now, if I wanted to apply that filter again, let's say I applied it and I want to intensify it by applying that filter again, I would simply go into the filter menu and choose that very first item. It indicates the last filter you applied. And by selecting it again, we'll simply apply that filter with those same settings all over again. Or you can simply use the keyboard shortcut, Command or Control F. And you'll notice it'll intensify that effect even more. So, another way of managing your filters. But that's pretty much it. I know that it's kind of a simple explanation, but trust me, you can spend a tremendous amount of time into these filters and doing all kinds of combinations and just experimenting with different settings. And another thing, experiment on different images. Now, of course, I've got this one image here, and I've tried several different things, and it's looking pretty cool. But some filters are going to work well with other images, and some images are not going to work so well. So you're going to want to experiment not just with different filters, but with different images as well, and just get a really good idea of what they do and how they work. And mess with the settings. When you're inside of a filter, if I'm inside the film grain here, go in here and just try different things. Try and push this highlight all the way up, push it all the way down. You never know what it's going to do. I've seen too many people write books and tutorials, and they'll say, here's a very specific way you need to use this filter, and there's no other way. Don't listen to that. Go in there and just try different things. You're bound to discover effects that you never ever considered before. I've seen people go off and perhaps even spend a few, several, even a few $100 on plugins that do very specific functions inside Photoshop, and only come to find out that later on you could have done that entire effect all the while inside Photoshop just by experimenting with a few filters. So, extraordinarily powerful resource for effects inside Photoshop, and I do encourage you to experiment with them as much as you can, and most of all, have fun with it. Now we're getting into perhaps what is one of the most common uses for Photoshop, and that is adjusting or correcting your photos. And Photoshop has a whole bunch of tools available to adjust your photos in very specific ways or in very general ways. And if you're brand new to Photoshop and you just want to apply some simple corrections, I encourage you to perhaps try out some of the auto features that are available to you. Now, all the adjustment features are available under the image menu here, and right away you see we've got 3 auto features right here: the auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color. Now, I can't cite any specific scenario where any one of these are going to be perfect. It's always going to depend on the image itself. So you'd probably just want to go here and try each one and see what kind of result you get. If I select auto tone, you can see the changes it's made there. It's enhanced some of the color and messed with a little bit of the contrast there. Let's go ahead and undo that. Let's go ahead and try the auto contrast. It's modified the highlights and shadow areas, but didn't adjust the color all that much. So that could be an interesting change. You can do the auto color, and you can see it's dramatically changed the color of my image, giving me a very interesting effect. So, depending on your image, like I said, you can try these auto features. If it gives you the result you're looking for, by all means, go with it. Otherwise, you can go into the more involved adjustment features, which are also located under the image menu in the adjustments category. And you've got a whole host of features here, as I mentioned, for adjusting your images in very specific ways. You've got this top category, adjust your color and overall lightness and darkness values. You've got very specific color adjustment tools here, and other generalized adjustment tools and effects tools down here. Now, I'm not going to be able to touch on every single one of these. You can certainly go in and experiment with them. And I just wanted to talk about a few of the more common tools that a lot of people use to adjust photos. One of them being levels right here. I'm going to go ahead and select levels, and it will bring up this dialog box. And what we're looking at here in this window is what's called a histogram, and it's basically a range of all the tones inside this image. It's going from 0, as you see right here, to 255, representing the 256 levels of gray, with 0 included in there. So you can see that this peak, where it's going from it stops right about here on the shadow side, and it stops right about inside here on the highlight side. And this is a good thing. You don't necessarily want this to be going beyond the edge here, which means that your colors are going to be going outside the range there. So we're looking good here, but you notice that we've got some flat area here and some flat area here, meaning that we need to close in the lightness and darkness values of this. And it's simply a matter of just taking these sliders here and then just moving them in to where that range begins, or where the histogram starts. Here on the shadow side, and we'll take this highlight slider and push that in to where it starts right about in here. And notice the dramatic change that has happened to our image. If I toggle the preview on and off, that's what we started with, and just by simply moving those sliders, we've got a really, really nice adjustment here. And I can almost be done at this point. I could go ahead and click OK, and I've made my adjustment, everything looks great, done and over. Well, another way of using levels, if we go under the image menu again and open up levels, is you can use the eyedropper tools here. And these allow you to set specific highlight and shadow points inside your image. So if I grab this shadow tool, it's represented by the dark eyedropper tool there, And what I want to do is look for the absolute darkest area of my image, or what point I want to be the darkest area of my image. So I can see that it's very dark here at the horizon of the water here. So I'm going to go ahead and click with that eyedropper tool right here, and you can see how dramatically darker it's made my image. But notice how it broke up the histogram here, making the values a little bit sporadic. Let's do the white eyedropper as well. I'm going to go ahead and click what I think should be pure white in my image. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this little white crest of the wave here, and let's just see what we get. See, that's way too dramatic there. So in this scenario, the eyedroppers aren't necessarily going to be my best bet. It depends on the image, of course, on how this is going to work. And I'm going to go ahead and reset these settings. I'm going to hold down my Option key and then click on the Reset button. So it seems that I've got a good range of tones here. I just need to close them in just like I did a moment ago, and that will be the best bet for correcting this image using levels. So I can just do all that, click OK, and I am done. So that's using levels. Now another common adjustment tool, of course, is using curves. Curves is considerably more complex than using the levels, but it does give you a much more accurate correction. It basically represents a range of tones, each end of this curve being the lightness and darkness areas. So if I move this slider in, you can see that the adjustment is made. One quick way of making an adjustment is just grabbing and clicking in the middle of the slider or of the curve here and just bringing this down. You can see it increases or makes the image a little bit darker. By moving the curve upward, it makes it considerably brighter. So you can move and adjust a specific range of your areas. You can click other areas and bend the curve to get very interesting adjustments. You can do more precise adjustments, or you can achieve very interesting effects using curves just by modifying this curve all the way around. You can see it gives me a very interesting result there. And again, like the other feature, it's got an auto feature here. So if I just go ahead and click auto and it runs auto curves on there, you can see what's going on with the curves, and my image does tend to look a little bit better. And of course, like the levels, you have the eyedropper tools that you can use. So if we go ahead and reset this, we can go ahead and perhaps click in the darker areas and the lighter areas and get a very interesting adjustment there. So there's a number of different tools, and there's a number of different tools within those adjustment features to be able to correct your images. So if I go ahead and click OK, you can see I got a different adjustment there. Let's go ahead and undo that. I'm going to go under the image menu again and show you just a couple of more. We've got the various color effects, as you see right here. If I go in here, and one very common one I use a lot here is hue saturation. Here's where I can go in and actually increase the saturation of the overall colors. You can see the result I get there, and modify that. If I wanted to apply a color screen over my image, you just click Colorize, and you get a monochromatic version of your image. And just dragging this hue slider, you can change the overall color. And this is interesting for background effects and things like that. You can adjust the lightness and darkness of that color as well. So if you wanted to get a screen background as part of a design, you can certainly use that. Also inside here we have a number of different effects features, as I mentioned. We can do a gradient map, which basically is like using the screening, but you can use gradients in the sense that you can apply various color effects as well. So it's not just adjusting, but it's also applying various effects to get very different results. You can there's a new black and white feature, which allows you to have a little bit more control when you want to make your images more grayscale. And you can use the color slider. So depending on what types of colors are dominant in the image, there was a lot of blue in there. So if we adjust that, you can certainly do that. This will give you a greater degree of control than simply converting your image to grayscale, which is going to look a little bit more flat. By being able to adjust all the various colors, you can get a much more or a much better black and white version of your image. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of these various adjustment tools in here. One other one, which is fairly new in recent versions, is the exposure. So we can increase the exposure of this image a little bit. We can offset that just to give it a little bit more interest there. And again, it has the eyedropper tools as any other features, but you can see it makes a very specific correction. And again, it's always going to depend on your image as to what type of adjustment you're going to need to apply. So as I mentioned, the most common ones, of course, are levels and curves. Hue saturation is a very popular one. And as you saw, in every one of these, there are those auto buttons. So before you go and messing with any of the settings in here, click that auto button, and it just might give you the correction you're looking for. Otherwise, go in there, just modify those sliders, and see what kind of correction you get, and hopefully it'll work out for you. Now, that's a brief introduction of the adjustment tools. In the next lesson, I want to get a little bit more in depth with adjustments and talk about something new in CS4, something we have called the adjustment panel, and using adjustment layers. Now, in the last lesson, we talked about the various adjustment tools inside Photoshop and how you can utilize them to make very simple adjustments to your images. Now, in this lesson, I want to talk about something a little bit more involved when it comes to making adjustments, and that's something called adjustment layers. Now, if you remember the last lesson, when I went to apply an adjustment, let's go in here and just do a simple adjustment. I'm going to go back into and do the curves. And let's say I wanted to make this image a little bit darker. I'm just going to go in here and just kind of pull that curve down a little bit. And it gets to a point and I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now what I've done is I have permanently altered my image. Once you start going and correcting your images, you are essentially destroying them. I know that sounds weird. You're trying to fix them, but you're in a sense destroying them at a pixel level. And if I go in here and make any other further adjustments, I'm simply stacking them on top of that and ultimately making the image a little bit more worse. Now, a few versions back in Photoshop, they introduced a concept called adjustment layers, which allows you to non-destructively apply adjustments to your images and have a little bit more control over them. So down here in the layers panel, right down here at the bottom, you see this middle icon here. If I click on it, you notice we've got all those very same adjustments that you saw earlier that we applied. Well, let's say I wanted to do that same curves adjustment, and if I select it, it's going to do two things. Well, it didn't open up the curves dialog that you saw a while ago. What it did open up is the adjustments panel. And this is something brand new to Photoshop CS4, which allows you to actually apply the corrections in real time through a panel instead of an open window in which you'd have to click OK and do all that other stuff. But also notice what happened in my layers panel. Let me go and drag this out so you can see what's going on. It actually is now a layer. It's called an adjustment layer. So if I turn this off, we don't really see a change because we haven't made an adjustment yet. So let's take that curve and actually bring it down. So now you can see it's applying that same adjustment I did a moment ago, but now it's doing it through this layer. I can toggle this layer on and off and actually turn off that feature, just like that. And we can go in here and make these adjustments anytime. Earlier when I made that curves adjustment, just going into the image menu and making that, it was permanent. I couldn't go back in there and modify that curve adjustment after the fact. Here, if I go and do something else, if I go in here and just make some changes, let's say I go in here and just run a filter for laughable reasons. Let's say I just run a crazy blur on here and I click OK. I can go back into that adjustment panel and there's that curve right where I left it. I can make it lighter, I can make it darker, I can do anything I want because it's in adjustment layer. And you can apply, and you can actually stack adjustment layers on top of other adjustment layers. I'm going to go and undo that blur I did a moment ago. So we still got that adjustment going on. I can apply another one. And I can do it in two ways. I can use that menu in the layers panel, as you can see right here, but I can also use the adjustment panel itself. You know, this is what the adjustment panel looks like when you first open it. And you drag over these icons, it will show you the name of the various adjustments you're doing. So let's say in addition to that curves, I wanted to go ahead and add a levels adjustments, for instance. Well, I'd simply click on that icon and it would add a new adjustment layer, and here's my levels dialog. So let's go ahead and push the sliders in and make this darker. Bring that highlight slider in. And it's given me a very, I'm obviously over adjusting this image, but I think you get the idea of how I can stack multiple corrections on top of each other and being able to actually independently modify them after the fact. Earlier, now if I'd gone and applied a curves and then a levels dialog, just doing it the normal way, going into here, I wouldn't be able to go back and adjust them. And not only that, they're completely separate. So let's say I've applied the curves and then this levels, and I don't like the curves anymore. I can just take that curves adjustment layer and throw it away. And now all I've got is my levels change there. Not only that, you'll notice that there's an additional icon on the layers here as well. Let me go ahead and turn off, let's go ahead and turn off this curves, or the levels actually. This extra icon is actually a layer mask. If you remember talking to me briefly about it back in the layers lessons, I can actually not only apply an adjustment, but I can isolate it to a very specific part of my image. So if I go in here and let's go ahead and fill this layer mask with black. I'm going to go ahead with, and it's highlighted by the little outlines right there. I'm going to press Option Delete, or rather we can go under the Edit menu and go down here to Fill. And I'm just going to use black and click OK. Now, it looks like the adjustment has gone away, But all we did was fill this layer mask with black, which makes it completely invisible. Now, if I go and grab my brush tool, and let's go and grab a very soft edge brush here, and we want to paint with white, because white is going to reveal what's on the mask, while filling that layer mask with black will hide it. So with white set as my foreground color, and I go in here and start painting, you notice what's happening. Now it's revealing or bringing back that adjustment inside. So if I wanted to isolate the adjustment to a very small part of my image, I can do that. If I just wanted to darken up these trees down here with that adjustment layer, I can certainly go ahead and do that. And you'll notice it's reflecting inside the layer mask. There's a little white area revealing that correction. So adjustment layers are very, very important, and perhaps the most commonly used tool. I doubt there's many people that use the traditional way. Unless you're going to apply a correction as part of an effect or something like that, you're probably going to want to use adjustment layers to give you much more flexibility when you're working with correcting your images. Now going back into that panel, you'll notice there's a number of different of all those adjustments here represented by icons. You drag over and it shows the name. But there's also a long list of presets down here. So let's go ahead and throw these two adjustment layers away. So let's say, remember I was talking earlier about using auto features to see if it'll correct your images without a lot of headache. Now you have all these presets in here. So let's say I go in here and maybe I want to try the increase contrast 3. So it applies that adjustment as an adjustment layer, and look what it's done to my image. It actually looks pretty good. If I toggle that adjustment layer on and off, looks like I've got a pretty good correction there. So these presets and auto features are usually a good starting point when you're correcting your images. And as you go, you'll start to get more familiar with these adjustment tools and being able to make the changes yourself. But it's, like as I said, very good starting point by trying some of these presets and seeing if it gives you the result you're looking for. So just click on it and apply it. Now obviously that one's way out of whack there, so that's not going to work for what we're doing. You can make it darker. That one actually does look like it might be a pretty good adjustment. Looking pretty good. So a lot more flexibility, a lot more freedom, and a lot more ways of isolating the corrections to very specific areas of your image, which is one of the things I love about adjustment layers. So hope that gives you a better idea of how adjustments work. The first lesson we talked about the basics of adjusting, but you're going to want to utilize the adjustment layers inside your images and just have that flexibility and the freedom of stacking them on top of each other and being able to throw various adjustments away whenever you need to. Now, another one of the many uses for Photoshop is something called retouching, and that's being able to remove little unsightly blemishes on your photos or just any type of elements you want to remove. And there are a number of tools that let you do that. And I'm just going to go here, I'm going to zoom in on this image. I'm just going to double click my zoom tool and get really close in on our face here. And I just want to remove some of these little tiny blemishes on our face. And I'm just going to use my retouching tools. If you go into toolbar and click on this tool right above the brush tool, you've got a number of different healing brushes here and a number of different tools as well. Well, one of the most obvious ones being right here is the red eye tool. If red eye is a common problem in your photos, you'd simply just select that and then click directly inside your photo into the eye, and it would go ahead and take care of that. But some of the more common features are these healing brushes. Well, the first one here is the spot healing brush. And this is a really, really cool tool in that if you just take your brush, and I'm going to increase the size a little bit, and I'm going to make it a little bit softer. You just go over any blemish that you want to and just simply paint over it, and you can see it magically disappears. How cool is that? You just go over these little tiny blemished areas, and you can clean up the photo really quickly and easily. Just like that. And what it's doing is that it's basically the area you're painting, it's looking around the surrounding area and taking that common area and kind of blending it in. Just giving you a quick little fix there. So that's great for fixing tiny little areas. Now the other tool, of course, is the healing brush itself. And what this allows you to do is the very same thing, but allows you to sample part of your image that you want to make the correction for. So if I wanted to remove a blemish, I could simply hold down the Option or Alt key and sample this part. I'm just going to click in this area here, and you'll notice if I drag in this area, it's got the sampled area attached to my brush. So now when I go in here and click on this small blemish and just paint it, you'll notice the little crosshair where I had originally sampled is sampling that area and applying it down here, making that correction. So I wanted to take care of this line right here, to simply click right here, and I'm just going to drag along that line. You'll see that it's easily removing that little area there. Very, very cool feature there. Very cool way of removing blemishes. So, I mean, they both basically do the same thing. One gives you a little bit more flexibility over the other. The other one here being the patch tool. Now, I like this tool a lot in that it does very similar things that the healing brush does, but it does it in a very interesting way. What it does is you basically draw a selection, pretty much like you were drawing a selection with the lasso tool. So what I'll do is I'll just take this tool and just draw around this area, just like this. And now I've got that active selection area. If I go inside here and I just click and drag to an area that I know has no blemishes, what it's going to do is basically sample that area and apply it to the area I've selected. So when I release my mouse, you'll notice what happens. Now it's nice and clean area, making that adjustment very, very easy. Let's do the same thing over here. I'm going to drag and select around this area here. And it really doesn't, you don't have to be precise in your selecting of an area. If I just drag this up in here, I know this isn't entirely the same type of tonal range, but it's not going to look at that. It's mostly going to look at the texture and modify it that way, and kind of leaving the tones alone. If I release, you'll notice that it gives me a pretty smooth transition there. And I can do it on just very small blemishes on her face as well. I can just drag this over here, and it samples that area, making that correction real easy. So I like to use the patch tool for very broad areas, and you can use the spot tools for very specific areas. Like this area here under her eye, it seems a little shiny and rough, so if I selected that area with my patch tool and just dragged it down here, you'll notice that it smooths it out considerably, giving me a much better result there. Very, very cool stuff. So that is the basics of those healing tools and the patch tool and everything like that. Now in the next lesson, I want to talk about a tool that's been in Photoshop for quite some time, and that's this tool right here, the Clone Stamp tool. And this gives you the ability to not only make subtle changes, but it gives you the ability to remove or even add unwanted or wanted elements into your photos. So let's have a look at that. Now, another popular tool for retouching in Photoshop is something called the Clone Stamp tool. And it's located right here in the toolbar underneath the brush tool. If you click and hold, you can see it's right there. It's also called the rubber stamp tool, some people like to call it, just because it looks like a rubber stamp. But it works very similar to, if you remember the last lesson, we were using that healing brush and we were sampling an area and then painting in. The difference is that healing brush, when you sample an area, it's going to look at the texture of an area and make the adjustment that way, and it kind of leaves the tonal range and color for the most part intact. Whereas the Clone Stamp tool pretty much will sample an area quite literally. It'll bring over the texture and the color and everything. So let me just show you. I could describe it all day, but let's just see how it works. So I'm going to select the tool, and I'm going to go inside my image here, and here I've got this flower, and let's say I want to create a duplicate of it over here on the other side. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Option or Alt key, and I'm just going to go down here to the very bottom and just click and sample the bottom area of that flower. And you can see my brush represents that area that I sampled. You can see it floating right in there. Well, if I go down here to the bottom of my document and just click and start painting, you'll notice over on the other side on the original flower, the little crosshair is mimicking my movement as I move up, sampling that area and then painting it in on this other side. So it's a quick and easy way of painting in a new object from within the document. Just like that. So I can duplicate objects. I can also remove objects. If I go over here into the texture, the background texture, and Option click right in that background texture, I can go ahead and remove an object as well. Now, notice what happens when I went too far. Now it's going to remember this area over here. So if I click too close to, if I sample an area too close to my original object and I paint and creep over in here, you'll notice that the original flower will start to paint in because it's sampling where that flower used to be. So you got to be very careful of that. You want to make sure you're sampling an area that's pretty far away, and then you can just paint and remove that area. And if you need to resample a new area, just click or Option or Alt click again and just brush that area away. You go right down in here and we've removed that flower quickly and easily. So let's see it in a different way. I'm going to go into this photo here, and let's say that I want to perhaps duplicate this ferry boat here and remove this boat and its wake right here. Now obviously it's going to be considerably easier because we're against a water texture, and depending on what type of image you're working on, you're going to want to be careful as to what size brush you're using and various things like that. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to click and sample the area of the water right above this boat here. And I'm just going to go right down here, right over the boat, and just start painting in. You can see the crosshair is working along with me as I travel along this image, just like that. How cool is that? So now the boat's gone. So let's go over here and sample that ferry boat. I'm just going to Option or Alt click right on it, and you can see that it's showing the sample right inside my brush. We'll go right in here and just start painting, and bring that boat right over here to the other side of my image. How cool is that? So it's a very cool and easy way of removing unwanted or unsightly objects in your images by using the clone stamp tool. If you're going to make very small retouching adjustments on faces, you know, like we were removing those blemishes earlier, you're definitely going to want to use the spot healing or healing brush tool for that type of thing. Now, doesn't mean you can't use these tools, these healing brush tools, in any other image. You know, if I grab that spot healing brush and I go over here, and let's say I want to remove that little red boat, you can just paint in there, and it will mimic or look around that surrounding water area and make that similar adjustment. So they're not entirely isolated to faces. You know, these healing tools aren't necessarily just for retouching faces and blemishes, stuff like that. You can try them on all different types of things, and they'll give you very interesting results. You can use that patch tool. Say I wanted to remove the boats altogether. We'll just drag that tool all the way around, drag it over to another part of the water, and boom, and now it removes it. We can take this area here and remove these areas very quickly and easily, giving us nice empty area convincingly like there's no boats right there in the water using those simple adjustment tools. So again, depending on what type of image and what type of retouching you're going to want to do, you're going to want to try different things, and each one's going to behave a little differently on varying images. So try them, give them a little test run and see what kind of effects you get. But that is the way you make simple retouching adjustments using simple tools right inside Photoshop. Now, this lesson I kind of tossed in at the last minute because I wanted to be able to show you how you can generate really interesting composites by blending two images together. And this is something I get a lot of questions on. A lot of people want to know, hey, how can I put together a simple composite? You know, I don't want to make it too complicated. So I thought I'd throw this in and just show you how easy it is. And we're going to be using some layer masks to achieve this. You know, I was messing with some layer masks in the earlier lessons, but I just want to show you how can you use them to make a really interesting layout. So here I have an image of this cello here, and I've got a sheet of music here as well, and I want to blend these two together to make a really compelling layout. Well, I'm going to take this image here, and I'm just going to drag it up to the title bar of this image here, and let's just drop that right in there. So now it's a new layer right inside this image. Well, I'm going to hold down my Option key, and I'm going to go ahead and click the layer mask icon, and what it's going to do is hide that image by filling the layer mask with black, as you can see right here. Now, we're going to use the gradient tool, and I haven't used the gradient tool much in this course, but if you just select the gradient tool and you have a number of options right up in here, you have a number of preset gradients in here that you can choose from. The one I use the most commonly is the second one, and this is the foreground to transparent gradient. So right now my foreground color is set to white, and that's what it's using right now, is foreground to transparent. So I'm going to use that to reveal. Now we know if we add white to a layer mask, it's going to reveal whatever is on that layer mask, or whatever's on that layer rather. So we're going to go ahead and use that. Here you can choose the various types of gradients you want to use. You can use a standard radial, or a standard linear gradient, a radial gradient, and you've got other specialized gradients here as well. And I'm just going to use the regular linear gradient. And I'm just going to go over here to my image. I'm just going to click and drag right from the outside area here and just drag inside my document and then release. And you'll notice what's happening. If I Option click right on the layer mask, it'll actually show me what I just did. I just drew this gradient that's going from white to black and with some gray area in between. And now that gray area is going to show some transparency, and that's what we're looking at. If I Option click back on there, we're seeing some transparency through there. We're seeing this area at 100% because we filled that area with white. And then as the gradient travels on, we get into the black area, and now we can see that guitar right through there. So I'm going to go undo that. I'm actually going to reapply that gradient in a little bit different direction there. And let's just go right there like that. So a really quick and easy way of blending those images. So let's say I wanted to add maybe a piece of text in here. We'll just grab my text tool. And I'm just going to go right in here to the very top. I'm just going to click to set a text layer. And we'll just type the words music. And let's go ahead and highlight that text. And I'm going to go ahead and make the size a little bigger. I'm just going to use the scrubby slider here and make that really, really big. And we'll just position that in there. I'm going to double click and highlight it again. And I'm going to change the font. So let's go in here. I'm going to scroll down and get a really scripted font here. Let's do this Zapfino here. And again, we need to make that size a little bit smaller. And we'll just kind of add that right in there. And I want to change the color, of course. So let's go ahead and double click and highlight that and click the color icon and make it white. And there we've got some interesting text right on there. Well, I can make it a little bit more interesting text if I go over here into the blend modes and just choose overlay on that. And you can see it's blending in with that background in a very interesting way, giving me an interesting result. So in just a few steps, we've taken 2 photos and a simple text layer and created a really interesting layout. And the beauty is it's all still on its own individual layers. I can turn them all off and get a very interesting result altogether. If I wanted to, I can go back in here and reapply the gradient. Let me go ahead and fill this with black. I'm going to go to Shift Delete. Or you can simply go into the Edit menu and go down here to Fill. And we're going to fill it with black again. And let's try another gradient. Let's come in from the other side and see what kind of result we get. I can undo that and come in from the side. We can come in from the top, get a very interesting effect there. You have a lot of possibilities, and this is just a very easy way of compositing your images together to achieve a very interesting effect. Now, if I go into the toolbar and flip around the colors, and now my gradient is set from black to transparent, I can go ahead and mask more of the area back in just with the gradient there. So I can come in from this bottom corner and mask that effect in a little bit better. Again, still on its own layer, looking like a really, really interesting layout. So, basic compositing techniques, go in there and practice with the layer masking. It's a very non-destructive way because we've done nothing. It appears as though we have deleted parts of that music sheet when in fact we have not. If I hold down my Shift key and click right on that layer mask, it will temporarily disable it. You see a little red X in there. And now we can see that the music sheet is all there. It's all intact, and we can go back and modify it and change it any way we want to. But the mask allows me to blend these images together for a much more interesting layout. So that is basic compositing. Try it yourself and have fun with it. Alright, so in this last lesson I want to talk about saving and exporting your documents. You've created your designs, everything looks great, and you're ready to go ahead and output it. But first you're going to want to save your document. And you don't want to wait until the end of your design, your end of your work, to actually save the file. This saving is something you're going to want to do at stages throughout your design. Because trust me, if you spend hours on a layout, you're not going to want to go back and have to restart it all over again. If something happens, if your system crashes or Photoshop crashes, these things can happen. You're going to want to save your documents as you're working. But let's say, for instance, I've got my design ready. I'm going to go ahead and save. So you just simply go into the File menu and go to Save As. And you can choose your destination where you want to save it. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and save it to my desktop. And down here is where you choose the format you want to save it in. Well, if I know that I'm working in a layered Photoshop file and I want to keep it that way because I'm going to want to go back in there and modify the layers as I work, then I'm going to want to go ahead and keep it as a Photoshop format. As you can see right here, it's the first item. And it's indicated in the name as a .psd. So if I wanted to maintain my layers, I'll simply select that item and click Save, and it will go ahead and save that document out. Now, another format that will support layers is the TIFF format. If you choose that, and it will save a layered file, the problem is it will make your file size a little bit larger. So I wouldn't use this to save a layered file unless you have a client or someone asking you specifically for a layered TIFF file. But just know that TIFF does in fact support layers. Now the other common formats, you'll notice there's a lot of different formats in here, but unless you're working with very specialized service bureaus or anything like that, the most common formats you're going to be using are going to be the Photoshop PSD format, Photoshop EPS, the JPEG format for web and other things like that, and PDF, as well as the TIFF feature here. So those are the most common formats you're probably going to see when you're receiving Photoshop documents from other people. And you can choose any one of these. I'm going to go ahead and choose JPEG. Now, when you want to output a file as a JPEG, what's going to happen is it's going to flatten your file. And you don't necessarily want to do that. So one of the things I like to do is I go ahead and go under the Image menu and go down here to Duplicate. And in that duplicate file, I'm going to go ahead and flatten it. And now I can go ahead and save it as a JPEG. And just go ahead and choose that and save it out, and I'm still keeping my layered version as well. So we'll just click that and choose JPEG, and it will save it out, and everything's all good and well. Now, another way of saving your documents is going in doing the Save for Web. If you go into the File menu, you can go down here to Save for Web and Devices, and what it's going to do is open this giant dialog. And this is only critical if you're a web designer and you are developing graphics for a website, and file size is critical, and perhaps if the color management is critical. So you'll notice you can go in here and choose various formats. I can choose a GIF, JPEG, or PNG, and you can modify various settings here. You can set the quality of your JPEG. You can go in here and choose how it's going to load, progressive. Choose your monitor, whether it's going to be on a Macintosh or a Windows platform, and various settings like that. And when you click Save, it'll go ahead and save it in that specific format. So it's the same way as saving as a JPEG in a sense, but you have a few more features available to you to optimize the file a little bit more. So that's saving for web, and that's saving the file in a general sense. Now, let's say you're ready to print your file. What do you do? Well, when you're ready to print, you simply go into the File menu and go down here and choose the Print command. And you'll get this giant window here, and you'll get a preview of your image. And you'll notice right away, one of the first things I look at is that the file might not be the right size for the right size media that you're going to be printing on. And if it isn't, you simply click this button right here, and it's Scale to Fit Media. So it'll take your layout, no matter what size it is, and scale it proportionally to fit whatever media you're going to be printing on. So that's a very cool feature there. Up here is where you would choose whatever printer you're going to be printing on. If you're connected to a network printer, you would go ahead and choose that in here. You can go in here into the page setup and modify various other things like the paper size and other page attributes like that. You can change your orientation, but you can also change the orientation right here. Notice it'll turn the paper so it makes the print go the other direction. Very cool there. And you've got other bounding box. You can go ahead and turn that off. You can see it's giving me a bounding box area. You've got the color management area here. So if you are going to a very specific printer and you want to use perhaps specific profiles, you can go ahead and do that right in here using color management features. And the rendering intent, depending on what type of setup. Again, these features are going to depend on what printer you're using. So you're going to want to get those specs from your printer or from a service bureau that you're using before you go off and start using these features. But that is, in a sense, how you would go about printing your images. And when you're ready, you simply click Print, and you're good to go. So that is basically how you save your files. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to wait till the end of designing your document at that point to save your file. You want to make sure you're saving as you work. Once you do something critical, and what I like to do is if I do something really big, if I've applied a filter or I've done a really intricate effect on something, at that point I always save. I can't stress that enough. You want to save it because if you spend a lot of time creating a certain effect and something happens, you're not going to want to have to go back and do that again. A lot of times I've done really, really involved effects and the system will crash or something will happen, and I just didn't want to take the time to have to go and redo that. So saving the document is a very, very critical thing. Now, if you've done an effect, now here's an interesting point about when you go about saving documents. If I've done an effect and I like it and I go ahead and save and I go off and I experiment a little bit and I achieve a different effect I didn't intend on, then I save another version of that file. So let's say, for instance, I go into the file and I do a save as, and we'll call this music. Let's call it music 1. And I'll save it to the desktop. And let's just assume I've gone and done some other effects. Let's say I've gone in here and I'll maybe colorize it. Use my hue saturation and I'll do a little bit of colorization here. But I like this and I want to save it for later use. But if I go under File and choose Save right here, it's going to overwrite that document I just saved a moment ago. And I don't necessarily want to do that. So I want to go to Save As, and I'm going to call this Music 2. Again, it's going to save it as a layered document because it's a PSD format, but now I have both versions of that file. You can see on my desktop here I have Music 1 and Music 2. So as you're working, be aware of that. Whenever you do something where you do a critical effect or something, that's what you're going to want to do is save it as a different name, and that will give you both versions of the file. So just a small point there on saving. All right, so as we wrap up this course, I just want to stress something that I've been mentioning throughout the course is go in there and experiment. I've given you the kind of the basics of all these various tools inside Photoshop of going in and trying different things to correct your images, retouch them, generate selections, but just go in there and experiment. In my years of using Photoshop, the best way to master these is to just go in there and practice. I can only show you so much, and I hope this has given you a good primer for going in there and getting started, but it's up to you to go in there and really master these tools and make something out of them. So, another important aspect of this, have fun. It is a lot of fun going in here and doing all these kind of really cool effects inside Photoshop, so just enjoy it and see what kind of cool things you can do. Alright, in this lesson I wanted to expand on something I had mentioned ever so briefly earlier in the course, and that's the concept of vector shapes inside Photoshop. Now, I'm going to go down into the toolbar. If you remember, that tool is right down here, and we've got a number of different shapes to select from. Now, I'm going to go ahead and grab this ellipse tool here. I'm going to go ahead and grab the polygon tool, and I'm just going to draw a box out. Now, what it does is it basically generates a shape layer. You can see in the layers panel that we've got a color layer here, just a color fill layer with a vector mask on it. And over here in my document, it just looks like any other layer or any other shape. But if you go into the tool right above the shape tools and this little arrow right here and you click and hold, you've got two tools in here. You've got the path selection tool and the direct selection tool. So I grab that path selection tool and click on my object and move it around. You'll notice that it has the vector points and curves on it. And I can move it around and do anything I want with it. You can also use the direct selection tool to grab individual points of your shape and resize it any way you want it to be. Now, the beauty of vector shapes is that they are resolution independent, meaning we can drag and drop these between any size document and scale them up and down and do whatever we like, and it's never going to lose quality the way a pixel-based image would. And that gives you a tremendous amount of advantages when you're designing or if you're working in graphic design, if you're going to be working with various color shapes. This is a good way of keeping very sharp edges on those objects by using these vector shapes. So we go back into the tool here. I want to talk about another couple of aspects here in the options bar. Well, let's go ahead and delete that layer. So if you're up in here, notice that you got these three icons. You've got this first one, which represents drawing a shape layer. This next icon will draw just the path itself and not fill it with a color, as you can see. Still being able to use the path selection tools to modify it and reposition it, but it's still just a vector shape. And this is an interesting way of going about generating selections of various types of shapes. In fact, let me go ahead and delete that. Let's say you wanted to use a custom shape. Now, there's obviously rectangular, rounded rectangulars, ellipse tools, there's even the line tool. There's also the custom shape tool. And here is, you notice up here in the options bar, we've got a new menu here. If I click on this, you can now access a number of different types of graphic shapes. Not only that, there are a number of different categories of shapes in here you can load. So if I wanted to get some arrows perhaps, I'll append it to this section. And we'll just grab an arrow shape here and we'll just drag it out into my document. Now, again, it's set to paths, so it's only going to show me the path now. If I wanted to generate a shape layer of that arrow, I'll just simply drag that out, and it will give me a shape layer, and that's because I've selected this first icon here. Now, one other thing I want to talk about shape layers is these icons right over here. These are the adding and subtracting, all from the various shape layers. So if I wanted to add to this existing shape, then I would go ahead and select this icon and grab another shape perhaps, and we'll just add it to that. You'll notice what happens in the layers panel. We now can see those two distinctive shapes, and we can also select each one individually. Even though on the layer it represents one color. If we go over here and deselect the layer, we're still looking at one basic shape, but it's made up of two individual vector shapes that we can move around independently and even move outside each other if we want. And I can also change the way this is blending. If I move this over that shape, and right now it's set to combine, or to unite with it, what if we clicked on this feature? You'll notice it removes that area. It can intersect the area and do other effects like that. So it's a quick and easy way of generating shapes and being able to modify them using the various vector tools. And again, the advantage being that they're resolution independent. Now I'll show you one of the more common ways of using these vector tools. Let's go ahead and grab our text tool here. I'm just going to click inside my document and we're going to set some text. So we'll just do SOS. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this text up, and I just press Command or Control T to open up my free transform, and we'll just resize this object. And another way of getting in there and resizing your object is simply going to the Edit menu and going to Transform, and we'll just do scale. And we'll just go in here and modify that shape. Just like that. Now, I'm going to go into the layers panel. I'm going to hold down my control key or right click on your mouse and click right on that layer, and you'll bring up this menu. We're going to go down here to this option right here, which is convert to shape. And you'll notice what happened is now turned that text into a vector shape layer. So if we were to go over in here and grab our vector shape tools, we can move these objects around. So I'm just going to overlap these shapes just a little bit like that. And I'm just going to use that same path selection tool and drag and select all of these shapes. And I'm just going to change the blending here. Let's see if we can we'll do this last one right here. And you'll notice that it gives me a very interesting effect. And it's able to do that because they are now vector shapes. So you can achieve a lot of interesting effects using these vector shapes. And as usual with the other features, I encourage you to go in there and just experiment with them and see what other kind of cool features you can come up with. And have fun with it. So that is Vector Tools inside Photoshop.